Hi, y'all. Welcome to our last conversation in Black Philanthropy Month. I just want to warn you now that I'll be looking down because they told me my papers were too loud. So I just wanted to let you know that. I'm not looking away from you if I'm looking down. I'm so excited to talk to you all on our last conversation, and it truly will be a conversation around Black Philanthropy Month. Before we get started, for our guests who need closed captioning, that is on Facebook. And so if you're on YouTube and you need to see captions, look at Facebook. And if you're on Facebook and you don't see captions, it is something you have to turn on in your settings. I wanted to start by acknowledging the land upon which we are standing is the unceded land of the Duwamish and Coast Salish people, home to the Duwamish, Suquamish, Snoqualmie, Tulalip, Muckleshoot, and Pulop nations. And I apologize if I butchered any of those pronunciations. We also recognize that others on this call may be on different territories and want to acknowledge the importance of all lands and Indigenous people who are active stewards and shapers of communities. In addition, we recognize the vital contributions, innovations, culture, and labor with which this country was built by enslaved people who were brutally taken from the continent of Africa and brought to the US, built by indigenous to this land, and by immigrants, volunteer and involuntary, trafficked or forced. We honor with gratitude their contributions and lift up their work and spirit, enduring spirit. Never mind. So it's Black Philanthropy Month. Black Philanthropy Month is an inclusive opportunity to illuminate the ingenuity and transformative impact of Black generosity, encourage increased investments in Black communities. It was started by Dr. Jackie Bouvier, I hope I didn't butcher that, Copeland, and the Pan-African Women's Philanthropy Network in 2011, and is recognized around the world. This is the first year organizers in the state of Washington, our state, have come together. Those organizers include the Black Future Co-op Fund, myself, Lindsay Hill, ESK Family Fund, Renton Regional Community Foundation, Philanthropy Northwest, and the Seattle Foundation. It is our desire to support an intentional focus for our community. We've worked with the governor's office, and Governor Inslee has officially proclaimed August as Black Philanthropy Month in Washington. As organizers of Washington Black Philanthropy Month, our goals are to uplift the rich legacy of Black philanthropy, reclaiming what has been co-opted, and to inspire increased investment in Black communities, shifting the philanthropic paradigm and expanding Black philanthropy's model of generosity. All right, y'all, are you ready? So if you haven't already, please get acquainted with the chat. We really do want this to be a conversation, which means you guys have to talk to each other. You have to talk to us. If you've ever been at an event in Seattle that I have monitored or moderated, you know I like to say, please talk to me. And just because we're virtual doesn't mean I don't want you to talk to me. So please talk to me. I also want to just start off by saying, give us some grace. We're doing this from our homes and our offices. There are going to be mess ups. There are going to be sounds. There are going to be kids, husbands, dogs, the outside world. You might hear it, and that's okay. I also want to root you in the space I was when we as organizers were talking about this specific event, being on the last day of August and being the last of our virtual series. We want to talk about money, and that can be an uncomfortable conversation, and that's okay. A year ago, in 2020, I had just written a poem about how it was 90 days between George Floyd and Jacob Blake, I apologize. And I felt like already the country was ready to move on. We were already over it. These uprisings that had come and sparked such a shift. And, you know, we work in organizations where we've told change takes time. And at the beginning of COVID and the beginning of these uprisings, we realized that change doesn't take time. It takes the people at the top being uncomfortable and their money being in jeopardy. And then all of a sudden change is really freaking quick. Also, there's probably going to be some cussing on this. I think you should know that. So change suddenly was very quick, and it was not very proactive. It was very reactive. A lot of companies made a lot of promises they didn't know how to keep because they'd never done this work before. They never listened to communities before. All of a sudden, all of these people cared about Black lives, and they had built their organizations the way the country had built this nation, on the backs of Black people. They were surprised that all of a sudden everyone cared. And so organizations and folks went into overtime trying to take that care, take that focus that was given to Black Lives Matter and Black communities and make that transfer into dollars going to the Black communities. So companies pledged, and they pledged big, y'all. $49.5 billion were pledged to the Black community, which is awesome. It's a lot of money. 49 billion, it's a lot of money. But we're talking about systematic change. We're talking about years of systematic oppression. And when we're talking about that, it's not really a lot of money. And let's talk about the money a little bit. So of that lot of money, $45 billion were actually loans or investments. They were money pledged that those institutions would recuperate. They would get profits from the money that they pledged eventually. Only $4.5 billion were free money or grants. And of the total $49.2 billion that have been pledged, only $1.7 billion has been distributed. So we were like, me and the panelists talked about, how do we dive into where is the money? We aren't part of these big corporations. We are mostly work at foundations or nonprofits. How do we want to talk about this? And we realized we want to talk about accountability. We want to talk about taking those Black squares and those reading lists and those pledges and how all of that turns into accountability. How do you hold an organization? Maybe it's not Apple or IBM. Maybe it's your local foundation, the company in your backyard who pledged to do something different. How do you go about holding them accountable? Who needs to hold them accountable? I think it's all of us. So let's talk about that. And so we're going to start with introductions. And I probably should have introduced myself, but we're going to introduce these panelists. They're each going to introduce themselves, and they're going to answer this question. The question is, let me get my papers in order, y'all. How did your work shift and your orientation to philanthropy shift after the uprisings? And so they're each going to answer that question, starting with Afi, and then it's going to go Aisha, Victoria, and we're going to end with Cece. But maybe I should start. I would say my work shifted a lot. I actually left a job where I was educating mostly white women around philanthropy and the resources to be better community members. And I decided to take all of that knowledge and invest in activists, invest in communities directly, because it really bothered me that we as philanthropy spend so much time educating donors, and we don't spend that much time educating the community on how to access the work that foundations do for them. I mean, you hear a lot of people who didn't even know that there were all of this money that they have access to. A whole nother story. I'm sure we'll get into it, but we're going to start with Afi. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Afi Tengue. I am the VP of Philanthropy and Impact at Giving Compass. For those of you on the phone, I'm a Black woman in a Black sweater and some gold hoop earrings and some red lipstick. And happy to speak with you guys today. So for me, last year and last summer, having worked in philanthropy and in nonprofits for my entire career, it was just this really big wake-up call that centering whiteness isn't working and philanthropy has failed. And our approach and my approach to the work has to be about reparations and demanding what we deserve, and calling out white supremacy when we see it, and what structural inequality looks like, and how we map out ecosystems of change and power building in communities of color in ways that donors can engage in and support and join the movement while seeding decision making and stepping back. How do we engage donors to show up and step back and really just hand off that power to communities of color and queer and trans communities? And so for me, it's really been a big shift in patience and rage, and really channeling that into us doing work in urgent ways. So that's my introduction. I'll hand it back to you, Morgan.
Thank you so much. And I also forgot to say, you all have the privilege of listening to Black women talk today. So I do hope you truly listen and understand how privileged it is to be in this conversation. And I'm going to pass it to Aisha now.
Hey y'all, I'm so excited to be here. My name is Aisha or Asha, depending on where you're from in the world. I use she, her pronouns, and I work at an organization called Powerful Voices, which co-creates brave spaces with young, primarily Black girls. And I'm just so excited to be here with everyone. And, I love this question, Morgan. And I think for me last year, it was a really big awakening because I know like a lot of my colleagues and I have been talking about these kinds of things for years. And I know for myself and just working in fundraising, it's a primarily white space. And so I know that I had been saying a lot of things for years and told like, Aisha, that's really crazy. Like I remember like talking about like, we would have like donor events, or I would work with different orgs and I'd be like, we should also like include volunteers, or like things that are not even that radical, but just saying like people donate their time and that is also valuable. And those are primarily like Black and brown people who might not have a higher capacity, like money-wise. And just like things like that, which I think are small, but they add up. I remember like being told like that was not the way things happened. That was not what it was, like that's just not possible. And so I think for me last year, like it was just a really big moment when everyone was like starting to talk about these things. And I was like, that's not that interesting. It's actually not interesting. It's not that innovative. I know like the one Black person who worked in your development department has been saying that for like 5 years and you have not listened. And now that you have this like contractor who you don't have to deal with every day, they've come in and told you, now you're like paying attention. But yeah, I think for me, it was just a wake up to be like, oh, we like definitely know what we're talking about. Like Black folks working in this world really have been on the forefront of innovation. And so I think for me, like the big shift for me was just my own confidence and confidence in my peers of being like, oh no, like we're actually ahead of the game by so many miles. So I think for me, that was like the biggest awakening that happened last year. And also, as I've continued talking, I realized that I did not give my description of myself. So I will just say that now before passing it off, that again, my name is Aisha. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a mixed Black person, so I'm light-skinned. And I'm wearing glasses and a Black hijab or a headscarf. Yes, and I'll pass it to Victoria.
Thank you, Aisha. Hello, everyone. I'm so glad that we're here together. My name is Victoria Santos. I use she, her pronouns. I'm an Afro-Caribbean woman. I have long locks and I'm wearing glasses and a blue shirt. I'm currently one of the founders with 3 other colleagues of the BIPOC ED Coalition, which works across Washington State. And I'm also the senior advisor for Young Women Empowered, an organization that works with young people who are, both young, who might classify themselves as women and also gender nonconforming folks. When the pandemic hit, and then also when the pandemic of the murder of Black people reached a peak with George Floyd's murder, my colleagues and I had already been thinking about what is happening to the sector, the nonprofit sector, and the way that people have been just exhausted and run through the ringer and paid very unlivable wages. And we wanted to bring BIPOC EDs together. And when the pandemic happened and George Floyd happened, we immediately said, let's call everyone together. Because at that point, we just felt like we just need to be together and see what it is that how we want to impact what's happening, especially since our organizations were under-resourced, and we were trying to shift resources to do mutual aid and to really meet our community where they were at. And so at that moment, all four of us, just sort of maintaining 2 jobs at the same time, and in some cases 3 or 4 jobs at the same time, said, let's put our energy into building this coalition and advocate for the sector. And we asked the community what they wanted us to do, and they basically said, we want you guys to really advocate for more resources to be funneled to the community, the organizations that BIPOC led, not taking away from anyone, because already our sector had been totally underfunded, but asking philanthropy organizations to release more funding. And then in addition to that, to really support wellness and help us to figure out how to create life-work balance, because so many people have been getting so burned out that they have left the sector. And so myself and my other colleague felt like this is what we need to do, and this is what we're doing. And so I'm just grateful that we're here together today. Thank you. I'll turn it over to Cece.
Hey, y'all. I'm so happy to be here today. I'm Cece Gardner Gleser, and I use she, her pronouns. And my description, Black woman, curly hair, and I have on a black shirt, which is my uniform. I wear it all the time. And beautiful black skin. So excited to be here. So I think that question, Morgan, that you started with is like, how did the work shift, and really what happened in our work at Satterberg, and I think just in general, for Black folks in the space and in any space that we're in, what really shifted for us was fucking tired. Like, that's it. I'm sorry to drop the F-bomb like in the beginning, but we're exhausted. And now because white folks are like, oh my gosh, they're murdering Black folks. White people are murdering Black folks and they aren't being held accountable. This is what we've been dealing with since y'all dragged us over here, okay? There's been no accountability. The fact that they're still trying to pass, I don't know if it's passed yet, but the anti-lynching law that's been brought, okay, how long, right? 400 years, and we really, and we're just exhausted. So I think what happened at Satterberg was we had to have real conversations. We had to. So many of us were in pain. I can speak for myself, and I was like in physical pain, emotional pain, emotionally exhausted. What is it about us that is such a threat that y'all don't want us to be here? My kids have asked, like, why'd y'all bring us over here if you just want to murder us for sport? And I think at Satterberg, the thing that we've been trying to push, we're a foundation, been around about 31 years, family foundation, family members on the board, not yet any community board members, all white board members at this time. No, we do have one board member of color. And then the staff is pretty mixed now. We have 3 white folks. I was the 4th person hired and 1st person of color. And every subsequent hire has been a person of color. So super excited about that. And not just people of color, but actual people from community, not just people that look like they're people of color. And we had to it was time to have the conversations. We have to have the conversations. This requires vulnerability on the part of white folks. This isn't abstract. This isn't like the thing that's out there. Like, someone got murdered. Well, why does that make you sad? What connection do you have to them? For us, in our family, we lost people to COVID. So it's like we're really dealing with the pandemic, and everyone we know has been impacted by COVID. And then on top of that, we have the uprisings, and people are like, well, what's going on? I don't get it. And now corporations wanting to make their statements, and all of a sudden it's like, oh my gosh, we got to do something now. And I'm kind of like, why? Why you need to? We've been asking you to do something for how long? What's the urgency now? Like, we need to actually get it right. And I need to hear you actually articulate why you're interested in doing this work now. We've been being murdered from day one. Why now? And if you really want to do this work, if you really want to be about this life, and you need to be all in, which also might mean you're going to experience some things that you don't like. You're going to be uncomfortable. Any statement that you put out there, you're about to be held accountable to. And that was the best thing that came out of this, is all of these organizations and nonprofits, foundations, funders, corporations put out these goddamn statements that now we're going to actually hold you accountable to everything you said you were going to do. And the conversations I think that we held at Satterberg is really what helped to push this. Satterberg has always given, unrestricted multi-year funding and giving at 10% or more. So, and I think in the funding world, that's like, oh my gosh, that's amazing. And it's like, that's baseline. Because again, it's not your money, how'd you amass the wealth and all of that. But if we really want to shift change, we need to be real about it and get money out the door faster and get money to those most impacted, to Black and Indigenous communities. And last summer, it was like, we're hurting. Black folks are hurting, and you need to move dollars, and not just move dollars to the traditional things, to the things that make you feel good, to direct service or housing, but like, are you ready to put your money into healing and rest for folks? Are you ready to give directly to folks that have been organizing on the ground for years and years? Like that, like, are you ready to do that? Not the things that make you comfortable, but the things that make you uncomfortable, with no reports. Because we're in a reparation mindset, and this is about making repair, healing, and getting the dollars back to the people whose money it actually is. So if you're ready to do that, it's like, we can have that conversation. And if not, then I can't be here. So thanks y'all for having me. Super excited.
Oh my God. I love you so much, Cece. I think it's so interesting because, you all have said so much already, but this idea of, one, what are you funding? Are you funding what makes you comfortable? Are you funding what creates change? And this idea of action versus accountability. And when, Beth, my friend Beth sent me a bunch of articles so I could get the statistics. And one of them was like, about how a lot of people decided they were going to fund HBCUs, which is amazing. Also, it's again, like, you could have been doing this already, but we could talk about that another day. Cool. Mm-hmm. And one of the quotes in that article was, education is a fairly uncontroversial place to give, when in fact, George Floyd as a catalyst specifically had to do with criminal justice and policing. Mm-hmm. And I think about that, like, even in your pledging, even in what you pledge to, you still, out of all this shift, of all these big changes, this is still where you decided to be uncontroversial. We've already moved so many mountains. Why didn't you just go there? And so now I want to ask, and this isn't on our questions I had told y'all about, but I just want to ask y'all what you think about the difference between action and accountability is. Because so many people said, these are action items. This is how you can make an action. And some of those actions looked like buying books on racism from white authors. I think we all know how Morgan feels about Robin DiAngelo. Why is she making $30,000 a session? I like, and Ijeoma is not, but that's another story. Anyway, so those are what your actions look like. So if I want to hold you accountable, what does that look like? And are you really ready for Black people to demand accountability? Because it's actually something we've never done.
Yeah, I can start. So yeah, lots of books. There's like a big surge in books and the Black squares and the reading list.
Oh, the black squares.
You know, there are a lot of actions that people could take to make themselves feel better, which is what I think has been the purpose of philanthropy in general, for rich white people to feel better about their capitalistic gains by paying white women, for the most part, a very small amount of money without benefits to do the work of change so they can feel better at the end of the day. For me, accountability is about, are you willing to fund power building in communities of color to the point where you are no longer the dominant party? Where it's not, where they can say, we can say what's important. As a Black queer woman, there are very different things between me and maybe a Vietnamese immigrant on what's important to them. But are you willing to hand over that power that we have as individuals and communities to us to tell you what's important to us and to hold you to account, to do things different, to not be redlining, to have to go to school with our kids, to demand that our education is the same as your education, and that there has to be representation that is equitable across are you willing to have a targeted universalist approach where those who are furthest from opportunity are the priority, meaning that it's Jonathan Coastal's savage inequalities all over again. Like, are you willing to take a step back so that we can have a chance in hell of taking a step forward? That's what accountability looks like. It's saying, like, I'm no longer in the front of the line and my kids are no longer in the front of the line, and I'm willing to pay and like seed all this money that I got through this ridiculous tax structure to communities to make decisions about their own future. Like, accountability to me is truly saying, yeah, I got this through a really trash process. Like, I'm going to give it back. I'm not saying like just throw money in general, but like there are like Groundswell Fund. They work with community organizers, like the Movement Voter Project. They do community building. Black Voters Matter. Like, there are tons of places that you can find to give money so they can build power and you can let it go. Are you willing to align with the Donors of Color Network? And like, as a white person, as an ally, just hand your money over the way they give their money. Like, accountability looks like saying, like, I'm not in, like, I have no right to feeling like I'm in charge or I should dictate because I have money what you do in your community for your future, and handing it over. So that for me is what accountability looks like. Oh, right now. And I'm gonna be quiet about it. And I'm gonna support you being in the front of the line at every chance I have. So that's my long-winded answer.
Thank you so much. Okay, Morgan, in all transparency, I'm going to say that Robin is a friend, and I'm not going to, I just want to put it out there. And I'm going to say too that I'm not going to go after her for making money from the same corporation that committed to giving out $50 billion and have only given 1% of a $495 billion profits that they made. Right. So I'm not going to go after her for that. But what I am going to say, though, is that accountability, this right now is part of accountability, because we have to hold people accountable for the promise and the commitment that they made and have not fulfilled. And when we have 44% of the U.S. workers are low, their median income is about $17,950. That is criminal. And when you talk about like the fact that this whole thing started because of George, like when the explosion happened around George Floyd, and that the commitment to fund criminal justice reform and policy changes and in preventing the violence and the over-policing of our community, and that hasn't been like even addressed to a percentage, and that the people who have been on the front line of this, like Patrice Collins, are being attacked. They're being attacked, and the funding and the resources are now going into revitalizing our community and creating opportunities for our young Black men and young Black women so that they are not criminalized, and that this constant funneling our young people into the prison industrial complex, because those prison industrial complex are producing for these same corporations. That's the part that sometimes feels like it's too hard to look at, and then we're just going to continue to get distracted right? It's like going on to the next thing. Let's go on to the next thing. We cannot go on to the next thing. We have to organize, we have to come together, and we have to go after let's not get distracted. Let's go after these corporations and these philanthropic organizations that are basically hoarding the money and not supporting and releasing it for our community, because it is in their interest to keep us fighting each other, fighting the next person, and not focusing on them as they continue to move the money from the community. And I go really global on this, because the thing is that these corporations are not even national. These corporations are transnational, and they're just going wherever they can exploit and wherever they can continue to make a profit. So that's what I'm wondering. Didn't mean to bring everybody down on that, but I'm just...
No, I think you're fine. But I think there is something about how sometimes folks' actions end up benefiting more white folks than actual Black people. And I also think about, like, when we talk about pledges, Chase Bank, one of their pledges, they decided to be place-based rather than race-based, because they said legally they can't say that they want to give mortgages to Black people. So instead, their pledge to get mortgages to Black people is going to be place-based. It's going to be on neighborhoods that are predominantly Black, but anybody can come and get a loan that lives in that neighborhood.
And and it is just like, I'm thinking, I mean, just so many thoughts right now. So let me stick on the one I was thinking, but and it is just like, and then, okay, we hear you. Now it is time, we're going to make the grants to the Black-led organizations. But the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to call Bridgespan and ask them to tell us who to give the goddamn money to.
Every single
time.
Really?
They're like, no, we got our racial equity analysis. We are about racial justice. We ready to go. And I'm like, oh, cool. Who are you working with? Bridgespan. I'm like, really? Or any other white organization. So it's like at Satterberg, we have the Reparative Action Fund, and really looking at the work as every vendor we work with, every consultant. So if we're going to make this $50 million commitment over 10 years, we're not getting ready to call like the whitest organization. We're going to go to individuals that have lived experience. Like we're working with Will Cordery that works with Leverage Partners and Freedom Futures, who has a long connection to not only philanthropy, but to organizing. So all of the money going out to the door, it's like we have grants going on this side. If we do, like the Equity Summit, that's all of these artists that we're moving money to. These are individuals. So you don't get to just make grants in this corner and then still use the same old white consultants, the white vendors for every other thing you're doing. And it's like, well, it was just quickest because we've worked with them before, or they know what we need or what we want. And I'm like, are you about this life or not? Are you gonna be in this work with us and make the full on commitment? Or when they bring in speakers, right? I'm like, this who's coming? Why he come? I thought we're about Black people now, but then it's like they're missing the entire connection. This has to be through and through the ecosystem. So it's like the accountability has to be through and through. You also can't just make grants and then be like, did you see the grants we made? When you haven't changed anything about the way that you talk about the work, about how you live, are you living through the work, and just thinking like it's good enough for you to just throw your money at it, but I don't have to change anything internal about myself. I don't have to be accountable to the things that I'm doing personally, any of that. It's like now you just want to move money to it, but that's not enough. I mean, I think those days are over. Like you have to be all in or not, because it's like all money's not good money at this point.
And I know, Aisha, you did a lot of work around what Cece's talking about, being from a nonprofit and not a foundation. A lot of work around who do we want to engage with, and also as a nonprofit, seeing all this happen, how are you thinking about action and accountability right now?
Yeah, I think being from a nonprofit, it's really interesting. when it comes to like individual donors and even foundations, like in response to everything that's been happening in the past year. And I kind of like, I think it's similar to my personal experience of last summer. And this was my favorite check-in question when I went to groups with Black people, was to say, so this week, like, what was your favorite white guilt gift that you got? Because it seemed like, you know, every couple of weeks, someone like pizza would show up at my house, like, or someone would send me a care package or something. Like white people I had not spoken to in years. They were calling me. They were like, how are you? Like, I know this is a difficult time. And I was like, hello. And also, like, a Black person also got murdered last week. Do you know what I mean? And so I think as a nonprofit, we were seeing that as well. We were seeing that from a lot of foundations and also from a lot of our individual donors. Like in July of last year, really big influx of donations from people who had not connected to our organization, who had not returned our phone calls for years. And it was great to see them. And it was also, it didn't feel genuine. And I think that that's the piece with the accountability, is that when you go so quickly to actions, a lot of the times I think it's to make ourselves feel comfortable. There's no reckoning with what is. Like, there's no reckoning of, like, for my like organization, we work with primarily Black girls, primarily Black Muslim girls from the South End. There's no reckoning for the donor or the foundation of, oh, like, I have not been funding these people for 10 years because 10 years ago, someone said a comment that made me uncomfortable. And so I pulled the funding. Like, there's no reckoning with that. It's straight into, okay, well, let me send you this little $1,500. And also with that, do you put us in your annual report? Do you post it on your Facebook that we donated to you? Do you let the world know that we are, you know, taking these action items? So I think for me, the part that misses there is that for there to be accountability, there has to be a reckoning of really being like, you have to admit that you have not been showing up, because this work has been happening. It's been there. And that you haven't seen it means you haven't been looking, and you've been actually actively looking away because it's been in your face the whole time. And I think also just the last piece I'll say about this is I think that white-led organizations, white philanthropists also just need to understand that no matter how much you give, the Black person on the other end is doing so much more, like, in this work. Because to show up in these conversations, to show up and like have me educate you or to have CC work with you, like any of this, like, you're giving so much up. You're opening yourself up to be traumatized, for people to say like, oh, is this even really important? Like, do Black lives matter? And it's like, you know, I'm Black, right? Like, that's just you asking that question. And I'm just thinking a lot about, like, last year, like, primarily the people that I work with are Black women or Black non-binary people. And we're actively protesting, and I'm writing, like, we're typing up the newsletter. Like, we're working and trying to be on the front lines at the same time. And so just being like, I think accountability is also looking at, like, you know, you sending that donation or buying that book, which you probably didn't pick up if the statistics are right. You probably pre-ordered it, and then didn't come pick up the book, because I know that was happening a lot last year. It's just not the same. And that's not accountability. And in my opinion, I think it really starts with the reckoning.
I love that reckoning. And it goes back to something Cece or Victoria said also, which is like, are you willing to fund healing? Because I think you need to fund the reckoning and healing equally. Like, what does it mean for so long? I know so many nonprofit organizations who a foundation or a company wants to have a advisory board. So they bring together these POC and Black nonprofits. They don't ask what their relationship to each other are. They don't know if they have drama or not. I've been in those meetings where afterward I was like, oh, I felt tense. People knowing I'm not from Seattle would be like, well, Morgan, 10 years they brought this group together and they funded so-and-so and they didn't fund so-and-so. So yeah, it's a little tense. And I'm like, well, why? Well, then why did we do this way? Like, Why wasn't there a healing conversation? Like, why? And they were like, well, they do this from time to time. They get a new leader and they decide to gather us. And I'm like, so no one's, I remember I had a call, I think it was with Ruby Love. And she sat me down and she was like, so this is everything I know about the history of philanthropy in Seattle. And so much of it was like, oh my God, I was just going to bring these two people together. I should talk to them separately first and say, like, are you comfortable being, things like that, where it's like, we just repeat the same cycle because there's no reckoning. And there definitely isn't any healing. And so they're creating rifts in our community because they get to decide when they want to engage with us. And they bring us together and say, hey, talk, figure out how we should spend this money. But hey, because you're on this committee, your organization doesn't get any of this money. And I'm also not going to pay you to be on this committee, but you're welcome because you're prestigious enough to be on the committee. I also want to remind people that you guys should ask us questions. Put your questions in the chat. And I just want to ask Victoria, because while Aisha was talking about how much Black people are doing, working on the front lines and working on the organizations, Victoria, I would love to know how you set up, decided to set up and unite and support these organizations that are your sister organizations and your colleagues. You know, we often joke and talk about how Victoria kind of grounds us all. If we're all moving very quickly, Victoria starts talking and it's always slow and it's intentional. And so when the BIPOC ED Coalition got started and I heard Victoria was involved, I was not surprised, but I did wonder how she was doing it all. I did wonder how you were doing that, plus the amazing work you do at YWE, plus all the other amazing work you do for the community. So I'm wondering how you did all that during the pandemic.
Well, thanks, Morgan. You know, YWE has been a blessing in my life in the sense that actually Aisha was working with us. You know, she actually, Aisha went through YWE. She also was interning with us and eventually came and did development work. And so I met some amazing, incredible young people at YWE, and it inspires me. I mean, like, just be on this panel, first of all, and to be here with Aisha is just like opens my heart, and it tells me like I'm doing the right thing and I'm where I need to be, you know. So the way that I do what I do is that I draw on spirit, you know. I draw on spirit, and I'm feeling like the BIPOC ED Coalition was divined for me. And YWE actually gave me the space and time to go and create and be part of bringing that to life. And there wasn't any kind of like, oh, you can't do that and your work is this, because, you know, we are painters, we're creators. And so to have a position that kind of like always like that tries to hem you in and try to like, no, this is what you're supposed to be doing, you know, it really takes away from, I would say for me, let me speak for myself, it takes away from my ability, my creativity, and what I'm here to do in the world. So there's that. But the piece around bringing the coalition together is because we need to really come together and strengthen each other and work our differences together so that we can really say to white dominant cultures, like, your time is up. We're not going to let you pin us against each other in order for you to profit from it, you know? And so that's really where I'm really focusing my energy, and my colleagues are focusing their energy on, because if we really come out strong and say, no, this is not, we're not going to accept. And I agree with Cece, like, not all money is good money. We had at YWE, there was a group of an organization, actually, let me say a corporation in Seattle that hasn't been paying much attention to the community, particularly even the community of color. And all of a sudden they got like, oh, we have this little money. We're just going to go around and spread it. And like what Aisha said, it's like, make sure you put us, give us acknowledgement and put us on your publicity and on your website. And what are you going to do? Send us your report of what you're going to do. And we said, no, thanks. And we gave the money back. We're like, wait, we didn't even get the check because we were like, no, we're just going to hold off on that. And the challenge comes, right, for an organization, a small organization, small nonprofit that's like just trying to grow and trying to take care and give money and resources to the community. It's like, oh my gosh, how could I turn that money away? It's challenging, right? But when we start doing that, it's like people take notice, and more energy comes to us because the money will come in other ways. And so, so I want to say that. And then also for me, right now, I'm committing, what I'm committing first and foremost is that we as Black people and people that have been harmed by the legacy of enslavement and that have been dispersed and whose family have been destroyed, our family have been destroyed. When I was doing my own reconciliation and healing my ancestry, I had to go back and oh my gosh, my lineage was so broken, because of what happened, the way we were enslaved, it wasn't that far long ago. So my primary concern right now is for the healing of Black people and people in the diaspora, the visibility of Indigenous people, because I believe that white supremacy thrives at the invisibility of Native people and at the exploitation of Black people, right? And then from that, I am interested in white people claiming themselves, separating from that label of whiteness, because it is that label of whiteness that keeps them still participating and colluding in the oppression of Black, Indigenous, and other people of color. So I am interested in white people claiming their own ancestry, their own heritage, and healing that so that they can reclaim their lost humanity. That's how I do the work.
Every time, Victoria, every single time, right? As you were talking, I thought, about the uncomfortability of people as we're talking about this work. People don't want to rub up against what makes them uncomfortable. So I'm sure, people have heard the saying before, like the worst thing you can call the white person is a racist. And the worst thing that a racist can do to a Black person is kill them. And how the dichotomy of those two things, like you're afraid of being called a racist, and I'm afraid of your racist actions killing me. And we don't ever get to that dichotomy because we're so worried about making people uncomfortable. And I know Cece and Afi did a lot of work around making people uncomfortable to be able to continue doing their work. And Cece, do you want to talk about that a little bit first?
Making people uncomfortable?
Well, just specifically, when you say it, it sounds like you're gearing up for something a little bit different than what I was gearing up for. But I just think about, one, the work that it takes to ask a family to confront that uncomfortability.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the hard piece, because everyone, they're like in communities of color, we're community, right? And there is this weird thing where white folks don't like to be in community with each other. It's kind of like one white person does something, or like, there goes that crazy guy, or whatever, or like, those racist, but not me, I'm not racist. So it's getting folks to be in community. Like, you don't get to just abandon white folks. Like, that's the work. And Morgan, exactly what you were saying, there is this dichotomy. Like, we're talking about murders, and then you're telling me you're uncomfortable on a Zoom? Like, we ain't even in person now, and you're still uncomfortable on the Zoom in the privacy and security of your home. And we can't even talk about it. Like, we can't learn about it because you're tired and fatigued of the learning. And we out here just living it, trying to stay alive every day, trying to make sure our cousins, our nephews, our sons, our fathers, our grandfathers, uncles, everybody stay alive. But you're uncomfortable and tired. And it is, I mean, I think it's just going through that over and over. And, and then there's a lot of groups meeting now, like white folks are really getting busy with the racial justice. They're reading the books and doing all the things. And then you have the white person that says something sideways at you. And then you tell the other white person, I'm gonna need you to get your people, collect your people. And they're like, I don't know them. I'm like, what do you mean don't know them? That's your job. That's not my job. And that's the work that white folks need to do. Collect your people. Stop making us do it. Like, we're done. Like, we're tapping out. Don't want to do that. I'm trying to do this work over here, like, for real. But like, if we could just get white folks to be in community with all their folks, even the ones they don't like the ones they don't want to see at Thanksgiving or whatever the holiday is where they get together, and they don't want to be, because they're like, I don't really want to make them uncomfortable. I don't want to talk politics. I don't want to. This is no longer politics. This is a matter of life and death. These are lives. These are lives. We're humans. We're real people. This is not politics. And y'all have to start having the conversations and acknowledge the white supremacist culture that we live in and how this country was founded. And I also need to say, not white supremacy, white delusion, as our staff members, I hear Lauren says, as they say, they don't want to connect the word supreme to white. So let me correct that. And white delusion is what is the system that we're actually living under. Like, making people uncomfortable is my favorite thing. Like, I think I could even get paid off of that.
Listen, it's also so interesting because I'm like, did y'all not have uncomfortable conversations at home? Right? Like, everywhere they're always talking about, you live in a blue bubble, you live in a blue bubble. I was like, everyone reflects your own views. I was like, where? Because in my house, no one believes the same thing I believe. And I'm constantly being told I'm wrong. Like, I have friends who have no problem. I have family who have no problem. No one in my life has any problem telling me that they think I am wrong. So how are y'all not hearing you're wrong? Like, how is this the first time? How on this Zoom is the first time you're being uncomfortable? I mean, maybe you're not in a Zoom where you've heard diversity is political. I've been in that Zoom a few times. That was rough to hear. That was a little bit hard to hear. I get you not being in that Zoom, but how are you able? Sometimes it blows my mind that it can leave your lips that we can't keep going because you're uncomfortable. Because I've never been in a position where my comfortability has been centered in a way where the meeting will stop because I'm uncomfortable. That didn't occur to me that is a possibility. The meeting could stop. We could not keep going on the agenda because I am uncomfortable. So it blows my mind a little, but Afi, we do want to discuss how you shift from donor education to donor organizing, because as Cece's talking about gathering your people, I think sometimes as foundations, we want to pick and choose when we want to educate. And I do think it is our job to educate our donors as foundations. If that is a family foundation, you should educate the family so that the family isn't saying something stupid to a nonprofit like Aisha, right? Like, if you're a community foundation, you should be educating your donors. The nonprofit shouldn't have to educate your donors. The community shouldn't have to educate your donors. So I think we sometimes get confused on what donor education should be and who should do it. I think that's a conversation we also need to have. But then on top of that, you talk a little bit about going from, once you've figured out what donor education is, going from donor education to donor organizing. And what is that for you?
So donor education is kind of like the book lists and all the books that came to them, like, hey, learn a little bit more about this thing that's of interest to you. Donor organizing. So like Vule at Nonprofit AF, he's like, what did he say? He goes, fundraisers and philanthropy, we typically treat donors like this is a tantalizing buffet of whatever you think is interesting, of options. Like, oh, you care about puppies? Here's a great opportunity to take care of all the puppies in Hurricane Ida right now, even though the entire population of like most of Louisiana doesn't have power or food. It's 90 degrees. Like, but you can save these puppies because you care about dogs, right? Like, donor organizing is like, this is what's wrong. This is actually what we need to do right now to keep humanity going, to keep, like, we're talking democracy, we're talking about power building in communities of color, we're talking about holding people accountable in off-cycle election times around the work and what that looks like long-term, and holding on and building more power and a snowball effect. So for me, like, donor organizing is about, particularly in philanthropy, because we are a gatekeeper. Like, the thing about wealthy people is like 42% of them talk to their spouse about where they give away money. The problem with that is the intersections of inequity are hella far away from the people with money, structurally, intentionally. And so when we think about like what we do in philanthropy, okay, we're like, I think they said like 32% of them will ask an advisor or ask someone who works in the space. Okay, well, we're that next line of defense. And what that looks like is figuring out how we provide an understanding of what structural inequality looks like, not just saying structural racism and like systemic yada. No, this is what the system is, and these are the inequalities, and this is why it is this way, and this is how you interject yourself in making it stop, right? Like, organizing is about, yes, there's a problem. Let me tell you what the systems are that created it. It's not because Black people are lazy and we don't care about our kids getting an education. It's actually like Black women are the most educated people in the fucking country. So really, what the problem is not that we don't care and we're not interested. The problem is you don't understand the structures that create the outcomes that you're looking at, and you didn't want to pay attention to them. Cool. Let me tell you how you do it and how you take it apart. And so for me, donor organizing is not about what tickles your fancy. And if you care about puppies that are in New Orleans right now, it's really about like, this is what needs to happen for humans to live with dignity and equitable opportunity. And this is how you do it. And you are not, again, I say this, show up and step back, because it's not because you have the money, it's your decision about how to do it and what's the right path. It's like, no. This is how you show up with some accountability to you being a steward of funds that were provided to you with a crap tax system where you were not being taxed for your billions, and you seed it with some knowledge and some bit of vetting and curation, like, to the communities who are making their own decisions. So donor organizing is about like, how do we in philanthropy facilitate that bridge between, like, create the proximity between those communities doing the work, living the inequality, and the people with wealth? How do we do that? And honestly, like, I personally, like, and I've said that, like, all money's not good money, and I do want people to figure out reckoning, but also, like, that climate report that came out 2 weeks ago, like, I don't have 10 years for you to figure out I'm a human being. Don't have 10 years. I need you to write a check now, and I need you to write that check for the next 10 years, and you continue on your journey. But I don't want to wait for you to get there. So I need you to spend your money now. I'm done.
Period. I mean, but I think that's so important. It's so important. And keep bringing in your questions. We're going to start with some audience questions. We're going to start with Nikia's second question. Can we talk about how many of us entered this work as tokens? I would love to hear this group's thoughts. I mean, they're trusting us, y'all. This group's thoughts on how that plays a role and how, why can't I say this word? Indigenous? Nope. And say the word. In how our
indignance
has developed. Wow. I can read, I swear. I will say, why did Darlin from Permuted sound it out for me in our chat, y'all? Sorry.
That is true commitment. Like, you know,
that is true commitment.
That was professional.
I'm dyslexic. I can read. I'm just dyslexic. So I will just say, like, my first job in philanthropy, I was the first Black employee on the team. And y'all, here's the thing I also want to say, and I'm going to pass this off very quickly because I don't want to talk about it a lot. One of the solutions people brought to this after the uprisings was all of a sudden there was a lot of women of color in leadership roles with no support.
No support.
No support. So you hire people of color and you are not prepared at all for there to be a person of color in the board meeting. You're not or you just haven't really heard what people are saying. So much of my job, my first job in philanthropy, was really restating what people had said and asking questions like, so they want to know how they benefit from a fund that is for women of color. Do you hear it? Like, do you hear how that sounds? How it's nuts to ask, as mostly white women, how you would benefit for a fund for what, then don't create the fund because it's not for your benefit. And so I think people they bring people in and there's no support. So I'm saying this, and a lot of people are going to hear, which is, well, then I don't hire people of color until my organization is ready. Your organization is never going to be ready. Double everyone's professional development. That's your first solution. Hire people of color, double everyone's first professional development. I would also say, just like, I was the first employee, my boss sat me down and said, I know you're going to experience racism. Tell me when it happens, because otherwise I'm going to be worried it's always going to happen. And I was like, she absolutely does not. This white woman absolutely does not want to know when I, as a Black woman in this mostly white organization, experiences racism. She's just saying that. So I started telling her maybe 10%. And if I would tell her something, she would say, you're not going to get fired. Thank you for telling me, and keep telling me. And I would say I still had to consider, when I'm in board meetings and we're talking about bringing in more people of color, how we can be more diverse, all these things that every organization talks about, how I remember sitting in a meeting realizing we're about to bring more people in and I'm not comfortable showing up as myself. So what is going to happen when a Black woman who is somehow more outspoken than me and somehow cusses more than a sailor like me comes in? They're not going to know what to do with her because they don't know what to do with me code switching. You don't know your non-white employees. I will tell you that. You don't know them because they are code switching to be in that room with you. And they were code switching last year after the uprisings. They were code switching after the Atlanta shootings. They don't want you to wait for a tragedy to ask them if they're okay. And when you don't ask, you don't have them on the diversity committee or whatever, and then they tell you this is wrong with whatever you're doing, and you don't listen. And then we are the ones that community comes to and says, hey, Morgan, you asked for my opinion, and then you produce something that has nothing to do with what I told you. So they're getting it on both ends. They're getting it from inside the house, and then they're getting it from the community who assume the Black person or the non-white person has more power than you are giving them. I'm going to stop talking. I'm going to let someone else talk about this question. But yeah, you guys you need to learn how to support Black people, and you need to listen to them because you just really don't. We have all these amazing, brilliant women now in leadership positions and huge organizations, and they have no support.
No support and no power.
And
right?
none.
Let's keep it real.
Victoria, how do you feel about this question?
You know, I learned very early on that white people will use whoever they identify as the token to pin them against other people of color, you know. And I have been in a lot of white spaces. I didn't get to the position that I am right now because of that, because I basically have created almost every position that I've been in. And a lot of it has come out of my own passion. So, but I have been in a lot of white spaces. And the thing that always gets me is like, oh, you're so amazing. You know, so my thing is every time I get a whiff of that, I just say, I'm going to write a book and it's going to be called I'm Not So Special. You know, because it is a trap. It is a total trap about making you feel that you're like so special, to divide you and separate me from my culture, from my community, and for people of color. And so I don't allow it to be done. But the trap also is about what happens with my own and someone who gets put in that position, their own internalized issues. So if you have an internalized inferiority, or if there's some internalized insecurity, it can feed on that. And before one knows, one is questioning one's own like existence in that space or in this life, in the career. I mean, no matter, you could be qualified up the wazoo, but there's all of these things that begin to permeate, you know. So I mean, like, for instance, when I came out here, I lived on Whidbey Island. You know, I lived on Whidbey Island. You know, that is white space. When I first came out to Seattle, and I would walk around in the street, people were like, even people of color would just be like, not look at you, not greet you, like, not, you know. And I was like, what is happening here? And then being in a predominantly white space, I had to keep, you know, I was going back to the Caribbean every time I get a chance. I started a whole organization called Sister Island Project so that I could go back to my village and be reminded of who I am, you know. So that's how I've been kind of navigating that space. But definitely tokenism is something that is a tool. It's a tool. Cece, what do you think?
I was gonna throw it to Aisha. I would love to hear a young person in this.
Yeah, I mean, I'll try to keep it brief. I have like 300 thoughts, but I'll narrow it down to 3 thoughts. I will say one thing that I noticed when I was getting into this work, when someone's like, when I'm in this work as a fundraiser for this nonprofit and brought in as a token, it's clear because people don't listen to what I'm telling them is reality. We had this long thing last year with a donor who came to a community conversation we were having about donor advised funds. And I said, donor advised funds are a way to wealth hoard. That is the reality of the situation. And this was a person who had been connected to our organization and who had helped to hire me, a white woman. And she had never done fundraising before. But after this conversation, she felt confident to email me and to say, hey, at the next community conversation, if you would like for me to come and educate people on what donor advised funds actually are, I would be happy to.
You didn't say actually, Aisha.
I'm so serious. Do you know what I mean? And, you know, about claiming the white ancestry, I'm half Irish American. We're allowed people. And so you just cannot get me started. And I was just like, I could not believe it. And I was just thinking back to when she was part of the decision to hire me, like the language that she was using, and then for her to turn around and then, you know, say these things. And then also we, like, as an organization, were watching throughout the year, like, as her donations went down and down and down and down, because she did not like this language we were using. So that's one piece. The other thought that's on my mind, and just kind of, Victoria, you kind of just sparked this for me, about how tokenizing takes you away from the rest of the community, or it has the potential to. And I will say also that mixed people and non-Black people of color are often the people who will my dad used to have this saying that you'll sell your soul for a jelly roll. He's from Alabama, I don't know. But it was just like, as people who are closer to privilege than people who are fully unequivocally Black in every space, mixed people and non-Black people of color are usually much quicker to, like, with lack of a better word, to sell out, or to be like, okay, I actually am the voice of the community. So let me filter what's going on, and let me tell you what is actually happening. And so I just think that that's also another danger when we have like this tokenization, is that those people who, like Victoria was saying, like those people that whiteness deems acceptable are usually the people with more privilege, who have actually more distance from community and from the lived experience that we're trying to uplift. So those are my kind of two thoughts that were coming up, but I'll pass it back to you, Cece, if you have additional thoughts.
Yeah, I think the only thing, thank you so much for that. That was good to hear. I think the only thing I would add is like the code switching piece. Like Morgan, you talked about that as well. And I think, like, of course, like you're told this is what you do in professional spaces. This is how you talk. This is how you show up. And it was finally, I just got tired of it. I'm like, I'm exhausted. I'm not doing this shit anymore. And, you know, and I think I think more of us are deciding to do it, like, you know, this conversation now, right? We are all just fully showing up as ourselves, as our whole selves, because I can't keep switching. Like, I'm a mom, I'm a sister, I'm a daughter. Where the hell am I? Like, I can't be, oh, I'm at work now. Oh, hi, no, I'm not doing that. I got to be the same person all the time. And, you know, and I think with other people of color, if we show up on panels and these conversations like this as our full selves, then it gives other folks the freedom to do it. But oftentimes there is that pressure of, okay, if I don't code switch, am I going to make all Black people look bad? Because I'm the only one because everybody else is talking with their big words. And I'm like, I don't want to do that anymore. I might use some language and you're going to be like, I don't know what that means. And you can go look it up at the end. The same way I got to look shit up when you have me, you know, you're not talking for me. Like, I don't understand what you're saying. I got to go look stuff up. Why I always got to do it, but y'all don't have to do it. So it's like, as soon as we can just release and we can all show up as our full selves, then we won't have the one person that's kind of sitting out as, how come you don't talk professional? Like, anytime I get 360s, people are like, you're too familiar. You're not professional. You need to use different language when you're in different spaces. And I'm like, no, I talk to my kids the same way I talk to people at work. Same person I am at home is who I am at work and in every other space. And there was one other thing I was going to say about that, but I don't remember. But yeah, if we can all please be our full selves and not allow, and just as Victoria said, not allow them to use us as the token. And as soon as you see it seeping in, be like, nope, I'm not about to be the token. If that's what you want to do, then I'm about to leave, and I highly recommend you not hire anybody else. And then actually start doing the things that so many Black women are doing. When they leave an organization, they send out that resignation letter. They publicize, like, whatever it is, they're telling you this was actually my experience here. Because they will try to use the tokenism as a tool, and it only works if we allow them to. Oh, and the other piece I was going to say too, because we are accountable to these two spaces, to our community, and then these are our jobs. But I'm always like, I work at Satterberg, but I'm accountable to community. Because if I don't do the shit I'm supposed to do, my community will call me out. My family will call me out. So you have to remember who you are and whose you are. That is key. Because if I can't answer to my dad or to my auntie or my uncle when I get home, I don't care what people are going to do to me at work. They still will beat my ass. So I got to just be real the whole time. That's scary. I'm not scared of losing a job. I can get another one. I am scared of my aunt.
Well, it's also so interesting because, but what all of you said is so important. But Victoria, that idea you said about not letting them using you as a token, I think I thrived at my last job because of Black women. You know, like Victoria, Cece, Afi, I said your name wrong, and I'm thinking about it. I'm gonna keep going though. But all of you guys reached out to me, right? So it's like when I was stuck between community and my job, I thought but community held me up when you all weren't checking for me, right? Like you guys weren't explaining X, Y, and Z to me. Cece was calling me and saying, hey, are you okay there? Do you need anything? If you ever need anything, let me know. Like that's very real. Okay, we're gonna go to the second question. A couple of panelists have mentioned reparations. Can you speak a little more about that and what you would like and what that could look like within philanthropy? Afi, do you want to start here?
So many things. So many beautiful, wonderful things. Oh, let's talk about reparations, friends. No, so I think like for me, and I keep saying it, it starts with power building in communities of color, long-term organizing, the local election organizing, like someone funding C4 and PAC dollars, like in communities of color, so that we can have candidates and cohorts of candidates who have peers to support them in a very white, hateful, delusional structure that will take it out of people. Like actually winning local races is how we deal with the local police chiefs and how we deal with accountability and how we build movements that we tap into for national, federal like legislation that impacts us all at every level. So for me, it starts there. Like reparation starts with, we're going to fund organizing and accountability in communities from top to down ballot all the time, like they do on the right. Hard stop. Like that's where reparation starts for me. And then, I mean, systems change takes time. So getting checks out the door that go into communities, that's one thing. And then like really, really focusing on like early math skills in communities of color, like literacy skills. I ran a literacy organization for years, like things that set our communities up to be successful over time. And then jobs, like solid jobs, public health, like everybody can benefit, but we could all use the dentist. Like just honestly, like actually taking the time to restructure, to be committed to funding restructuring systems and keeping the power in communities, and so that we are funded like they are on the right for decades at a time. That's our path forward. That's where for reparations starts for me. And then again, like focusing on like we want to get kids like I like to say, like, if I can find you when you're learning to breastfeed in the hospital and teach you about early math skills, like that's when I want to find you. But for those who haven't made it, like, how are we going to catch them up? What are the programs that we have? And then what are the pathways to careers? Like, we're going to get you a job. Not only are we going to do a program, we're going to get you a job with like labor market value where you can actually sustain a family. Like by the time you're 26, that's what we need. We actually need to structure and map it out and fund it. Like that's what reparations looks like for me. And you start with Black and Indigenous communities.
I will say before I pass it to Cece, because I know you've been doing some reparations work, Cece, is that reparations, in my opinion, cannot just be grant making. Reparations has to be in your operating budget. Yeah. It has to be from the ground up, because equity and reparations just being in your granting budget means you are not looking at your organization holistically and saying, how does every part of what I do move reparations forward? How does the vendors, as Cece said, move reparations forward? How can my consultant budget be, triple or double what it may be? Because maybe I'm using Black and Indigenous consultants who are trying to grow their business, and they're just about to start paying what the average white man is saying, oh, this is what I pay consultants. And that can be scary for BIPOC businesses, because so much of their work can be discounted so that they can help their community. So the idea of upping prices and then, but you saying, hey, my foundation can pay that price so that you can keep discounting your rate for your community. I will pay above full price so that you can give that discount to those who need it. That is reparations, in my opinion. Go ahead, Cece.
Yes, no, definitely agree. I mean, it needs to be across the board. We at Satterberg last summer, late last summer, the board made a commitment of $50 million over the next 10 years to Black and Indigenous centered work, and really BIPOC work, and the work that really moves all of the entire ecosystem. So those funds, those aren't just grants. Why are there ways that we can actually make money to organizations, to these Black-led organizations, like consultant firms, or event planners, like things like that, where oftentimes the small organization led by people of color, they don't have the capital to move on to the next project, or, you know, they're if you're not paying them on time, or, you know, a lot of times like payment process is slow on the funding side, but organizations need money to pay the folks that partner with them and that work with them. So how can we actually provide some capital for folks? How do we actually provide just money to people? How do we provide money for people to take a rest, take a break, take a nap, whatever it is they want to do? They want to go binge a show. Can we pay you for that? How do we give money to folks to allow them to just partner together and explore? Like, oh, maybe we could merge, or maybe we can build this other thing. Okay, can we fund that? Can we fund people to actually think about things? I mean, white folks get that all the time. Venture capital are always investing in folks and taking risks. But then why is it that we can't take the risk on people of color and the folks that built this country? Like, take the risk, return the money again, because it's not your money. And a lot of the funds that we've moved with this $50 million commitment, we've already made over $10 million in commitments. Some of those gifts are multi-year, but and a lot of those things are already moving. I can't say if the checks have made it out, but the letters have gone out. So we've committed to it, but, you know, again, check process moves slow. We still have paper checks. And some of the things that we're already funding, I mean, like Afi, you're talking about organizing, like we're funding Black emotional and mental health, Black organizing for leadership and dignity, BOLD, creative justice, liberated capital, mass liberation in Arizona. So we really want to fund a lot in restorative justice movement. The Embodiment Institute, which Prentice Hemphill founded, like really around healing. Wanawari in Seattle, that was really an anchor grant to really think about how do we reclaim space? So can we do some land reclamation in the places where Black folks were? And the Central District is one of those places where we go into the Central District now and we got white folks looking at us like, why are we here? And I'm like,
girl, I went to Garfield High School. You have no, I went to elementary school in Washington. Like, I grew up in that like 1 mile zone. Like, the day I got hustled by a white man at the bus stop to buy perfume, I knew it was over. Like, it was over. Like, I was like, what is happening?
From? But it was just, those are the ways we have to look at it. And we have to remove this idea of like this being our money and we're granting dollars and we have to see the need and all of that. It is time to just move the money and move it quickly. So I know we're trying to move like 10 million this year, 10 million next year. So front loading it, and then we can tear it down. It'll still be 50 million over the next 10 years, but we got to move it quick, allow folks that have built momentum to continue pushing and continue building on the work that they need to do. I'll stop there because we're almost out of time. Thank you.
Go ahead, Victoria.
Yeah, this is not, I know that the question was around philanthropy and reparation. I think Cece spoke to it eloquently. I am going to just say that reparation really also needs to happen at a federal level. And the federal government needs to give reparation to Black and Indigenous people. Black people, the African people that were stolen and whose labor was stolen and who were preventing from building wealth, from owning their homes, and were put in Indigenous people whose land were stolen, who were killed and their children buried. Federal government needs to repair that, because reparation is about repair, and they need to give that acknowledgement and need to give resources to Black. And I'm in this case, I'm of the believer that it needs to be people of Black Americans. Even though I'm Black and from the Caribbean, we have another issue that we need to deal with over there. But here in the United States, I would say that it is descendants of people that were enslaved in this country. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Victoria. And I know we're almost at time, so we're going to go over by a few minutes, and that's going to be fine because time is a social construct. But for our last question, I've just so enjoyed I love y'all. I just so enjoy being here with you all. But Nakia asked a question that we also had talked about kind of being our last question in the prep session, which is where are the collective efforts for the people that care about moving this work forward. I've seen so much during Black Philanthropy Month, and I'm wondering what's our next move. And I want to tie into this question just, people often leave meetings and they're like, what are some actions that we can do? And I would love as we're thinking about this question to think, what are some ways we can hold people accountable? How do we move this work forward? And Aisha, we're going to start with you. Sorry.
I knew you were going to say that, Morgan. And in my head, I was like, Morgan, don't you dare. But, we vibe. Yeah, I think that this is such, for me, it's a hard question, but I think the hard ones are the important ones. I think also, depending on the work we do, like philanthropy is a big word. And I think depending on where you fall in that, your accountability is different and what moving forward looks like is different. And I would say for me, for the work that I do at Powerful Voices, what we need to see from our community is for them to listen when we say we need something. So not just that you were going through your closet and you found these like coats that you want to donate, but actually looking at our website, talking with me and listening when I'm like, what we actually need from you is for you to show up with 10 or 15 of your colleagues to this event and move these products so that they can get to young Black girls. So for us, and this question is kind of difficult for me because I'm kind of like, we've already said what moving forward is for us. We've already said that we have these programs and we need them funded. And we need you to collect like your organization and work in your organization to give us sponsorships, to give us unrestricted funding for our programs. Because I also think that's going to be the future of this work is unrestricted funding, because these restrictions, they make it so impossible for us to actually make an impact in our community. So I think for me, moving forward, it's just a continuation of what we're doing. Like, I think that Powerful Voices in particular, but funding Black communities in general, it's just listening to what we're already saying. And I know just because this is also like relevant in the world, like always, but especially right now, like this is a big thing that Black fundraisers in Haiti, nonprofit workers in Haiti are saying, like, you keep sending us, like American donors, you keep sending us things that we're not asking for. And when you look at even like the past 10 years in Haiti, like what the funders will ask for, the nonprofit like Haitian workers will ask for versus what they get is so different. They will ask for like education support, for transportation support, for infrastructure. And what they will get sent is this stuff to train their politicians in the ways of American politics and things that for when another, earthquake happens, it doesn't help them. And they knew that 10 years ago. And now, American funders are like, oh, maybe that doesn't work. So I think for me, it's just continuing to listen to Black people, to really believe that we know what we need and to show up when we say we need, other folks in our community to show up. So that's what I got.
Victoria.
I would say that people go back and look at this invitation, and the organizations that put this together are actually doing a lot of this work and are in the conversation, and reach out to them and say, how can I help? Where can I send some money? And do that. And also, I think Aisha mentioned already, like if you work for a corporation that made a promise, hold them accountable. Go back and look at those statements that were made, supporting Black lives, and really, really ask, what have we done to really meet this? And have those uncomfortable conversations. Don't let the uncomfortable conversation be up to just Black women and other people of color in your organization. And then I would say also do your work. Once you start doing your own personal work, you start seeing what the needs are. And you know where you need to put the energy to help move things forward so that we can have a more just and equitable society. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Afi, and then Cece.
I think building off of what I've heard, like I would just say for like what does accountability look like? I would say like, where's your 401k invested? Is it in prisons? Is it in guns? Is it in the environment? Call your HR person. Like, I mean, like there are things that you can do that are perpetuating all the crap we're looking at right now that you don't even have to be uncomfortable for those things. Like you can actually just call to account, call corporations to account and remove the funding for it. And beyond that, I would just say, be an ally in rooms. If you are doing the work and you hear things, don't wait for the Black or brown person to say it. Get your people. Get your people. Like, honestly, somebody said it, look up people that are like, get your people. Like, you want to be accountable. Like, when you're in those rooms, when you're thinking about like you're hiring a new candidate, you haven't seen a single candidate of color. You talked to 15 people. You didn't do any targeted outreach. Like, there are ways to be accountable and to show up so that the people, the Black and brown women specifically, and gender nonconforming individuals are not forced to call it out, because it is trauma every single time we have to point our humanity. So if you could do that, that'd be great.
CC.
Yeah, and I mean, everyone has just about, has covered it. I mean, all has already said all the things. I think the main things are definitely being accountable, getting money out the door, supporting people, making sure that the insides of your organization match the outside. So if you're making some groundbreaking grants, but ain't nobody in your organization got healthcare, or you don't want to pay people too much. Like, what is this? We pay at the median, or we pay at the 75%. Pay me at the 150% because I'm tired, have a lot of generational inherited trauma. Like, pay people to thrive. Why is that wrong? And for funders, like, stop asking for those administrative numbers. Looks like you're paying people too much. So we really would give you the grant, but pay people less. People got to eat. And Washington, Seattle is hella expensive. So please pay people and start just holding people accountable. Ask the question. So if you're a nonprofit applying for grants and then they say, oh, but we want to know how many people of color on your board. What's your staff look like? MF, what's your staff look like? What's your board look like? Like, how do we hold you accountable? Like, that's where I want us to get to. And then I just want to say, like, please, like, funders, fund advocacy, fund organizing, fund environmental work, fund healing and rest, fund art, and mother freaking fund Black joy. Please, we deserve joy. Fund Wow Gallery that's down at Pacific Place. That was another organization we funded through this Reparative Action Fund. And please get down there and see it. But it's like, that is joy. And there's, for whatever reason, there's this thought that like, we don't deserve joy. We should always be in a space of suffering. We fucking deserve joy. That is our right. Fund the shit. Fund the shit that brings Black joy. Please.
Oh my God. I love y'all. I think you're so right. And I mean, this is, how I'm going to end this was just as like, your favorite activists might not be able to afford food. So what are you fucking doing about that? Ida just happened. You know someone who lives in New Orleans. You've been to New Orleans. I've seen your photos on Bourbon Street. What are you doing to fund their mutual aid? If we are all neighbors and I am your neighbor, don't you want me to live long and be well? How are you funding that? My friend Lindsay Hill says she heard at some conference, if Harriet Tubman was in today's world, would we have asked her to fill out a report? Or we would have just funded the Underground Railroad? Think about that. Would you have asked Harriet Tubman for a fucking report? Would you have asked her the demographic of her board? These organizations are frontline workers. Your employees are frontlines workers. Pay them with such. And also, I'm just going to say, like, don't say you're going to do things differently and then still expect things to be done on your arbitrary timelines. Like, if things are really done differently, if we are really seeing each other's humanity, then you need to think, can this project realistically be done in 3 months? Or am I putting constraints on my team. If this is too much for my team, should I either extend the deadline or should I hire more people? Also, like, send this video to people, right? Like, you're not going to get us this candid again talking, probably, you know? And also just, I want to thank the Black Future Co-op Fund. I want to thank everyone at Pyramid Communications for dealing with our nonsense, everyone behind the scenes, all the organizers for Black Philanthropy Month. This has been amazing. Mm-hmm. And also, everything that you enjoy, inquire about it. I would love for someone to email me and ask me, so how much did it cost to put on Black Philanthropy Month? I loved Black Philanthropy Month. Can I write a check? People's favorite donors are the donors who you don't have to ask for a check. Mm-hmm. They know things take time and money. Mm-hmm. And then add tax. If you're writing a check to a nonprofit today, add tax. Beth calls it the white lady tax. She's like, did you add the white lady tax to this? Yeah, add tax. Okay. Thank y'all. Have a good night. I know we went over. We're sorry. We could keep talking. We love y'all. Thank y'all.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
I think goodbye.